Pacemakers. What's the purpose of pacing? Augment our cardiac output. So we're coming off pump, and you've seen that. We go from a rate of 80, and they'll say, okay, we need a little bit more, so we'll turn it up to 90. So heart rate times stroke volume. We're increasing that heart rate there to help the cardiac output. Also, actually increase the heart rate. Let's say we're bradycardic, we have complete heart block. We have no intrinsic rhythm when we come off pump.
Amen.
Or, this is pretty much the reason. Different pacing forms, transcutaneous emergency use with the Zoll, it hurts. Hopefully the patient has a little sedation if you need to do that. Transvenous and other emergency use, you can actually connect those leads to this pacer. And then epicardial, which is what we're typically seeing after a cardiac surgery. So wires are going to be sutured to the right atrium and right ventricle, and they're going to exit off the right side of the chest and the left side of the chest. This is our old pacer that we used to have. This is the new one. I think it's model like 3982. So how do they work? They send a current from this pacer to the myocardium, which elicits an electrical conduction and contraction of our muscle. So sensing and capturing, these are the two kind of foundations of this pacer. Sensing, the ability of the pacemaker to detect intrinsic myocardial electrical activity. So the pacer is either going to be inhibited from delivering an impulse or triggered. So we'll talk about that in terms of AAI or AO, those modes. Capturing is going to be successful stimulation of the myocardium, resulting in depolarization. So you'll see that pacer spike and then a P wave or a QRS complex. Okay, so this is our pacer here. You see your wires, atrial, obviously the blue ones, ventricular, the brown and white ones, I guess. Your outputs are going to be measured in milliamps. So that's what comes on. You'll see 10 and 10. Those are our normal settings that come on when you turn it on. Your AV interval is similar to your PR interval. That's going to be the time from the atrial sense to pacing the ventricular. An atrial ventricular sensitivity, that's what measured in millivolts. And the default settings come up as 0.5 for the atrial and 2 for ventricular. We don't usually mess with those, but I'll talk a little bit about the sensitivity kind of at the end. All right, modes of pacing, 3 letters. Now, if you have an internal pacer like these people do, they can have like 5 different letters, and we're not going to go into that. These are just the temporary ones that we're using here. So your first letter is going to be what chamber is paced, and your second letter is going to be what chamber is sensed, and your third letter is going to be, well, what happens if they sense it? So these are a couple different modes that we'll see, AI, VI, DDD, and so on. So synchronous versus asynchronous pacing. Synchronous pacing is going to be synchronized with your heart's own rhythm. And it's not going to fire if it senses normal heart rate. Modes of that, AI, VVI, DDD. Asynchronous, which we're usually using when we come off pump because they're still using the bogey, the pacer is not going to fire no matter what intrinsic rate. So this way you have just a little bit of that risk of R on T. Modes of this, VOO, AO, DOO. And then I always make sure to switch this back to the synchronous mode before I transport to the unit. Okay. AI, the atrium is going to be what's paced, so your first letter. The atrial activity is what's being sensed, second letter by the pacer. And then when atrial activity is sensed, the pacer is not going to fire. It's going to be inhibited. Same thing for VDI. Those are the ventricles. DDD. Both of the chambers are going to be what's sensed. Both are going to be paced, and they can be either inhibited or fired. So first they're going to look at the atria, and if it senses it, it's not going to, it's going to inhibit it, it won't fire. You guys know how this works. The only thing is, if they're an AFib or anything rapid AFib, this could have, it'll have like this, an upper rate so they won't go into rapid atrial tracking where it's like sensing and like firing for the atria. Okay, so this is a little bit of the older model, like a schematic, but it's very similar to the new one. You'll have your atria and your ventricle, your A and your V at the top, and it tells you if they're pacing or sensing. Your battery indicator, if it's on lock. I'll turn this on. Okay. These if you want. So when you first turn it on, it's going to go into a synchronous mode, DDD, 80, 10, and 10. Okay. First thing I look at is my battery, and I'll go into that. This one needs to be changed. You can see it's like 2 and it's blinking, it's red. This one looks okay. And up here you'll see this thinks it's pacing. They're not connected to anything. But these will be your minimums and your defaults whenever you turn this on. You want to quickly change modes. You can, when you first turn it on, it'll come into this mode selection screen, and you can go down or up through that. And after a while, you can see it just changed to another screen. So if you want to change your mode, you have to scroll all the way down. You can also change modes, like if you wanted to get rid of your ventricular pacing by just turning your output off for your V's, then you can't pace anything ventricular if you don't have any output. Like so right now you're DDD, now you're AI, because you don't have any output to pace the V's. There's just multiple ways to change the modes, that's all I'm showing you. Okay, so troubleshooting. Failure to capture, saw this the other day. So there were pacer spikes, but there weren't any conductions. So reasons for this, low MA, so you don't have enough juice actually powering, your heart or whatever. The weak battery, like this one, acidosis or the pacing needs to become dislodged. You see that a lot with the nurses are changing the dressings, and all of a sudden like you don't have anything and they pop the leads off somehow, or somehow they've just popped off the heart and the surgeon's like, oh, just kidding, I'll put them back on. So you'll see that. Ours were we just turned our MAs up. It was kind of strange. We had to go up kind of high, like 20, which was pretty high. I was like, Dr. Dawson, that's pretty high for it to be right on the heart, but whatever. So anyway, I did see that the other day, but we had a failure to capture. Okay, quick thing about batteries, since I put it in here. These batteries are supposed to last, it says 9 days with a minimum of 7 days. I have like these lithium batteries in here. When it starts blinking, the manufacturer says you have 24 hours of use. But I don't know when this thing started blinking because it's been off in our little thing. I changed it. It's not hard, just pop 2 new AA batteries in there. Okay, so this starts blinking on you in the middle of the case, or you want to change it in the middle of the case. If it's at these default settings, 80, 10, and 10, you have 30 seconds to change it, and it'll keep firing for 30 seconds while you pop these batteries out. Pop them out, change them, come back in. Only thing is if you have like higher settings, like maybe your rate was 90 and your outputs are higher, you theoretically have a little bit less time to change it because it's requiring more energy. But yeah, so you can change these definitely while they're on. Okay, failure sense. This is what's confusing because the sensitivity is like an inverse number. The lower the number, the more sensitive your pacer is to what is actually happening in the heart. And the higher the number, the less sensitive it is. That's why I always think of it like a fence. The higher your fence is, you can't see your neighbors. The less sensitive you are to what's happening with your neighbors. So this is oversensing. So the pacer here is not firing. It thinks that those little blips there are intrinsic rhythm in the heart. So how do you fix this? So it's seeing too much of what's going on. You need to make it see less. Right? So you turn the sensitivity number up to make your fence higher, and then that will see less of the intrinsic rhythm. By turning the number up, you're actually less sensitive. Inverse it. I don't know why. It's confusing. Woo. Undersensing. So this one, the pacer's firing all over, but this person has a nice normal sinus rhythm, so it shouldn't be firing. So it's not seeing what's actually going on in the heart. So the fence is too tall. So you need to make this more sensitive so you can actually see what's happening inside the heart. You turn that number down. Inverse. So higher sensitivity, that number is lower. So the normal settings when you come on, like this one, let me turn this back on. 0. I'm gonna be 0.5 and 2. Hopefully you'll never have to mess with this. But if you need to, you just, turn it's on atrial right now. Think of it, right? You think that would mean more, right? You turn it up, it is. So the highest it can go, the most sensitive is 0.4. So if you turn it all the way up, your number's lower. It's more sensitive. Go to the left, so it's less sensitive, the number's higher. Theoretically, you take this number and you go up as high as it'll go, and it went into an asynchronous mode because it can't see anything the heart's doing. Hopefully you don't have to mess with that. Just think it's inverse. So the lower the number, the more sensitive it is. Okay? Questions? Quick and dirty?
I like the fence analogy.
Okay. I know. Hopefully you won't have to see that, but if you do, just remember the lower the number, the more sensitive it is.